time.
Yeah.
Oh, I having this heat waves over.
It'd be nice, wouldn't it? And throw that humidity on top of it, makes it kind of hot.
I'm so tired of hauling water, trying to keep my plants alive. I'm at the water company. I'm the first one in line every day.
Alrighty.
How much to fill that tank you have? In the truck?
It's, on that, it's 325. I have the other truck with the same size tank. And then I have like a swimming pool, like a stock tank at home that holds 300.
Okay.
Then I have barrels and rain barrels, but
What
haven't got any rain, so I'm trying to fill them from the water company.
does it cost to fill it?
That tank there, 325, a little over 325 gallons, it was like about $7.
$7 to fill it.
It used to be free, it's free. For $3 I could fill that whole tank. I mean, you couldn't go wrong. I mean, it was like, wow. But you had to drive down and get it, so you had to have a vehicle with a tank. But then it went to $8 and I'm like, oh man. And then they reduced for small people like me, because there's people that go in there in big trucks that hold 1,000 gallons.
Yeah.
So the small people like me that don't get a lot, they dropped it back to $7 for that. I don't know what that is per gallon, but it's not very much.
All right, so let's go back. We finished Esther when we started Job. So Esther is considered a folk tale. There is no historical evidence for Esther or any of the, even though the timeline and the way that the Babylonian kingdom was set up is outlined in Esther, and it's very accurate, but there is no historical evidence for Esther. So it's considered a folk tale.
Until they find something.
Until they what?
Until they find something, unless they find something.
So why is it in the Bible?
That's a good question. Well, the Jews put it in the Hebrew because it's not under the historical. The Jews have their Bible divided up, not Old Testament, New Testament. They don't have a New Testament. They have it divided up historical, prophetic, and books of wisdom. So Esther and Job are considered books of wisdom. So Esther was put in the Bible, and it tells the story of why the Jews now celebrate the festival of Purim, and that's where they give gifts to each other. And
Esther, is that the one that, she was the wife of the king?
Mhm.
First the king had some wife that didn't want to show up, and then.
Right.
So that wasn't real? Or may not have been real?
it may not have been yet.
So
I thought
the
that
festival
was part of the bloodline of Christ or something was in there.
No,
No.
and there is no mention of God in there, if you notice.
Hmm.
When you read through it, there's no mention of the Lord.
Oh, yeah, right. But the festival of the Purim or whatever that is there another name for it?
No. Well, there is. I don't know what it's
Do
called.
they celebrate that today still?
Mhm.
Oh, they do.
Yeah. So there's some scholarship that believes that there is some historical significance, but they can't find it. There are some Persian records, because that's where Babylon was located, was in Persia, but it has different names. And right now it's all speculation as whether or not this is really the person that is identified as Esther, and this is the person that's identified as the king.
But for about the last 100 years, a whole lot of this was considered not to be real anyhow, and then they keep finding more and more stuff proving it was.
Yeah, they'll continually find things.
So the king that how do you say that name?
Artaxerxes or?
AX, you know,
Yeah, Artaxerxes, yeah.
how do you say it?
Artaxerxes.
You don't have a record of him?
Yeah, they do.
So he was a king.
Yeah.
And so they, well, going to his reign, was there anything in there about it? I mean, they were direct.
Well, that's the thing, that's the argument is, there, a lot of the things that are described in the book of Esther are the actual layout of how the kingdom was run in Artaxerxes' time. But yet, there is no record of a Haman, there is no record of Mordecai, although they did find one record in Persia of a name where it talks about, that's during the same time, it talks about this guy named Mordecai something. It's not Mordecai as it is in Hebrew, it's Mordecai something, Mordecai or something like that. And he was real. And he was like the second in command, like Joseph was, to King Artaxerxes. It doesn't say that he was a Hebrew or anything like that. There is historical record of him. So they think that that's the Mordecai that's in the book of Esther. But
They now would have, a lot of groups wouldn't have honored the Hebrew anyhow, so, you know, if he was a Hebrew or not, that would be something they might
yeah,
not choose.
yeah. And then they're still trying to find it. They're still trying to
They
find it.
might find it, but
Yeah.
don't have it yet.
Did that other, not Mordecai, but the other name, did he have a daughter? In records?
Who?
Mordecai, but you said they found another name that was similar to his. There was no Mordecai mentioned.
Yeah. Apparently,
Did that
so
other
this.
guy have a daughter?
Yeah, he had.
Okay.
He had children, and so there are, the names are different, but and somewhat similar in actual records, but they're trying to find the smoking gun that ties them all together and says,
They
okay,
changed the names to protect the
So they
innocent.
don't know.
yeah, it could be. I mean, the Jews probably changed the name. You know,
Yeah.
problem here, she probably wasn't Esther. She was probably.
there a record of that king choosing to get rid of that one wife and picking in another? They haven't found it yet,
No.
maybe? Not yet.
So
But that's the way most of the Bible was for the longest time. A lot of people kept saying, well, there's no proof, it's true, there's nothing there. And then we keep finding more and more and more, it says it is.
So, Esther is in the Bible, probably for the very reason to show, sure what.
Important to women.
Well, it's called wisdom, yeah, and it's she was pulled into the harem, and
Not by choice, yeah.
and she had to spend the night with the king. So before she became queen. So, she.
They never mentioned that she ever had children herself either.
It doesn't, no. The story is laid out like a folk tale. And it's interesting, it's an interesting story. And a lot of people ask why it's in the Bible, but if you read it and you're reading through it, you can kind of relate, and I say kind of, relate the situation and the stories and relate it to, following God.
So did his main guy that he had that was evil and wanted to get rid of the Jews,
Mhm.
is he for real?
We don't know.
They don't know
Oh,
if there
so
was a
none of
generation.
But the king was real,
Yes.
so you don't know whether he got killed and hung on the pole or.
Yeah.
Okay.
They don't have a record of it yet.
Yeah. If there is a record, it's hidden somewhere. If it's, it could be like Babylon in Iraq. A lot of those records were kept from the general public. That actually, proved that the Jews were exiled in Babylon, and Saddam Hussein kept them from the world. So when we overthrew Iraq, a lot of those things were then discovered, but then they got pillaged by many of the Iraqis. They all just went in there and just pillaged the museums, and pillaged all the records, and so now they're just kind of spread out everywhere.
Well, when you look at the story, this woman could have chose just to be a high queen,
Mhm.
she chose to rescue her people at the risk of her own life several times. And she went in and, you know, she could have been put to death just by walking in there.
Yeah, and it's a story about Esther, but really, you have to think that when I think back on the whole book, the story's about Mordecai. Because if that guy really existed and that name was different, like they found out, then that's where the story is. And it's the same setup as Joseph, which he's called into Egypt. And Joseph is the reason why there are empires now, that there were empires throughout history. Before that, Egypt was just the Pharaoh and the surrounding city was there, and everybody else was like warlords and just different sections. But what Joseph did when he came into Egypt is Joseph pulled together all those other sections and all the warlords under the Pharaoh. And that's what became the Egyptian empire. So that by the time Moses came, it was now an empire. So every empire after that, Joseph was the one who started all that. So
taxing and all that.
Yeah, so now when we get to Esther, we've got the Babylonian Empire. We have Artaxerxes, and he's there, and he's now the king of Babylon. So he controls Babylon. If you ever look at an ancient map of Babylon, it was pretty big. And they pulled in all the side countries and all the side provinces, and they pulled everybody in under the king. So could this have happened? The book of Esther, yes, absolutely. They still have to find the record of it. If there are records, like I said, that exist, but the names are different. And so they're trying to distinguish if those names are actually the people in the book of Esther.
And you know, for a long time, they were trying to claim that Jesus really didn't exist.
Yeah.
And then they keep finding more and more and more that for sure he was.
Well, there's historical proof that Jesus existed.
Well, yeah. Well,
There's historical records from non-Christian sources.
But a whole lot of that was just proven in the last 100 years.
No, it's been around for hundreds of years,
Yeah,
but nobody's really looked at it.
Look at it or
Right.
even stated that for real, but a whole lot of stuff that didn't just tell you enforcing everything that was in there.
So we finished the book of Esther and we got to the book of Job. And one of the questions is, why did God test Job? Well, first of all, let's look at the book of Job. The book of Job is also written in a literary style using prose, which is a poetic style, and using folklore tale. So Job is written in that style. It's got folklore and it's got poemicism. It uses prose and it tells the whole story. The narrator in Job, who's telling the story, is obviously an omniscient person who knows the conversation that went on in heaven with God, who knows the conversation between Job and his friends, who knows all the details. So this person, whoever's telling the story of Job, and the author is unknown, knows pretty much all the conversations that took place.
Either a prophet or something.
Could this be another Esther of folklore?
Well, it's listed as under the books of wisdom, and it's listed as folklore.
Okay.
But the details are incredible. And when you read through the book of Job, and like we have been for the past week, Job is talking a lot about his faith and why he in God. It mentions God a lot. Job starts off with God's divine counsel. He has a divine counsel. They all present themselves, the sons of God, that's what they're called. They all present themselves to God, and Satan is among them. Now, Satan is not a name. Again, it's a job description. It means adversary. So the adversary was among them, and he wasn't. A lot of people like to say he was challenging God, so God let himself be backed into a corner. No, it's not what it is. God allowed him to come and make his presentation because God wanted to prove Job's faithfulness was very sincere, it was very genuine. And it was not because he wasn't being faithful because God had blessed him with everything. He was being faithful because he was sincere, because he was genuine. And that's what the story is about, is Job's genuine faith. So when you read it, and as we read through it, because that's like 44 chapters in it, we're going to see Job's character. He doesn't want to blame God. He blames himself. He doesn't blame his children. Because even his friends say, maybe your children have sinned. Maybe this happened. Maybe that happened. Maybe that's why all these bad things are happening to you. And he's like, no. So
not quite like the Israelis when they were going across. Every time they had a chance, they turned away from God. They weren't.
yeah, this was Job was faithful to God, and it's interesting because there's a lot of scholars and historians that will say that Job in the book of Job is actually the Jobab or Jobab, Jobab, in Genesis 36:33. He was a king of Syria. And when you look at the list of the king of Syria in Genesis 36, and you look at the list of what Job had in his wealth, it's the same thing. So a lot of them think that it's the same Job. Only in the book of Job, he's just called Job. In the book of Genesis, he's called Jobab. And that's in Syria. So there's a lot of people leaning towards the fact that Job was an actual person. And there is historical evidence of that.
Maybe that's like me being Walter or Walt or Walter Lee.
Right. So when you read that, keep that in mind. Even though the book is listed as folklore and as prose,
Got a lot in there.
there's a lot of information in there that deals with his faith and his relationship to God. And it's all focused on God and who God is. So whoever the narrator is in Job that's telling the story knows all the conversations between God and his angels, between Job and God and his friends. So keep that in mind. All right? No questions about Job? All right, let's go to 1 Corinthians. We've had to deal with a lot of things here. So 1 Corinthians deals with one of the first things early on in the week that we read about was the head covering. That women should cover their heads. And you have to keep in mind that first century was a whole lot different than what it is today. They didn't have the medical knowledge that we have today. So without getting into too much detail, I want to just make it as simple as possible. So back then, long hair or hair was considered part of the reproductive process for mankind. So women who shaved their head, they believed in the first century, would not be fertile. Women who had long hair would be fertile. Men who had long hair would not be fertile because the long hair would steal that fertility. That's what they believed.
Right, yeah.
And you find this information in Roman Greco medical texts, ancient Roman Greco medical texts. You find all this stuff in there. So Paul is using this language out of the medical text to tell them, what it really is, what it's really about. And it's not about being able to reproduce. It's about authority, acknowledging authority of God, and acknowledging, how God made you. This is why he says it's a shame for men to have long hair. He was using that information from the Roman Greco medical texts that men shouldn't have long hair because it's gonna affect your childhood, being able to have children, and because they really believe that. So he's using that to make his point. And his point is that God has the authority. Christ is over man, and man submits to Christ. And this is the way he puts it: man submits to Christ, woman submits to man, and that's the way it should be. So Submission is not the way we make it sound. Submission is not what we think. All right, people think submit, oh, that makes me a slave. No, it doesn't. Submission means subservience. All right? I'll get to that in just a moment, Sean. Submission does not mean that you are a second-class citizen. Submission means subservience. Romans 5:21 says that we should all be subservient to one another. It basically means think of somebody else more important than yourself. This is the story of Job, by the way. He thought of everybody else more important than himself. And this is how we should have, this is our mindset. This is how we should be.
The word subservient, does that mean work with, or what does the word mean?
It means to think of another person more highly than yourself. More important. Don't put your needs first, put their needs first. Yeah, that's what it means. Subservience is putting yourself second as a servant. I'm subservient to all of you because my subservience allows me to serve you. I put myself aside, my own needs, my own wants, my own desires aside to serve all of you. You should do the same with other people. That's what it means. So when Paul gets to the point and he says, women should cover their head because of the angels, he's making a reference to the book of Enoch because that was very big back then in the literature, Second Temple literature. And that goes back to Genesis 6 when the sons of God found women were beautiful and they mated with women and they bore the giants. And that's why Paul says you don't want the angels to sin. You want so that women should cover their head. But it was a symbol of authority back then. Back then, and this also goes with the subject of women being able to speak in church. Back then, assemblies in the synagogue were separate. Men would be on one section, the women would be over here at the side. So I'll address that in just a minute, but I know you had another question before I go on.
Well, when you were saying you should be subservient to submit to the other, make the other person feel better, go back in that time, did the men feel that way towards the women?
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. You see it, and you see a lot of that, yeah. You'll see in the church, you'll see a lot of that. In religious circles, probably like the Jews, you probably won't see that, or the Arabs, you definitely won't see that. Women were mostly, more than likely, just like slaves, treated like slaves. But in the church, they were actually treated as equals, which they should be. And they're treated with great respect, because look, you have Andronicus and Junius, who ministered to Apollo. They saw him in a synagogue. Now, keep in mind, they're separate. So in the synagogue, you have Apollos up here preaching. You have Andronicus, the husband, sitting with the men. You have Junia sitting with the women over at the side. And they're separate, because that's the way it was back then. So what they did was they heard some of the things he was saying that it wasn't complete, because he didn't have the complete story of Christ. So the Bible says that they both, husband and wife, pulled Apollos aside and instructed him in the way of righteousness. Apollos and Junia also had hosted churches in their home. So, and they did that together. You see it with Priscilla and Aquila, the same thing. They were servants. And I've said this many, many times. She was considered a deacon, and deacons are not what a person is. It's not a title. A deacon is what a person does. It's not what he is. All right? It's what a person does. It means to serve. So anybody who serves others would be considered a deacon.
And the Bible talks about when they were arguing, the disciples were arguing, who's going to be greater? He said the greater one. It was the servant.
Right.
The servant was the greater.
You want to be the greatest, you have to be the servant of all.
Was a servant.
Right.
Jesus himself was the servant.
Exactly, and that's the point he's trying to make. So that's what Paul is saying in here. So now when we get into the church activities and we get through when the gifts should be used and all this other stuff. He talks about the gifts, and he talks about tongues, and he emphasizes the fact that tongues is an earthly language, not some made up gibberish. It's an actual earthly language from someone from another country. And he says that someone who speaks in an unknown tongue, there should be someone there to interpret, which tells you that they had to know that they were going to speak in a tongue.
Doesn't he say he prays with his understanding, he prays with
Right.
understanding, and he sings in the spirit and with understanding?
Singing in the spirit, praying in the spirit has no relation to speaking in tongues. And the charismatic movement and Pentecostal movements have put those two together. They don't belong together. There's nothing in the Bible that says when you pray in the spirit, you're praying in tongues. That's not what that means. It means when you pray in the spirit, you're praying in connection with God.
What it says about praise in an unknown language.
Yeah, an unknown human language.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but there's no need to pray in an unknown human language because we have the word and we have no need for that here. I mean, if we lived in a foreign country, yeah, that might be a different story. And
Pray in tongues morning all, pray in the spirit, in an unknown language, to me. And again, he does emphasize, even if it was a prayer where you're somehow speaking in an unknown language to God, it's not supposed to be something that's presented in the church.
no, he doesn't say that, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, well.
So yeah, so you have to keep in mind that the gifts are not distributed equally to everybody. And when you got people who say,
You don't have the
and
Holy
you have
Spirit.
people today who actually say this, they'll go to you and they'll say, well, you need the baptism of the Holy Spirit, you need to speak in other tongues, and I can help you do that right now. No, you can't. Because 1 Corinthians clearly says that all the gifts are distributed by God. He gives them. And they're gifts.
Yeah.
And they're not something that you can just choose to do.
Not all receive it.
You get, and so you get people who think that they can go around healing people, which they can't. Or people can go around getting people to speak in tongues, which they can't. Only God is the giver of all of this. And so if that stuff happens, then it happens. Now, what did Paul say? He said, I would rather that you prophesy than speak in tongues.
Something they can understand.
So prophecy is forthtelling, and forthtelling is basically speaking by divine inspiration, right? You say, okay, does that mean foretelling the future? No, it can, but it doesn't. It means prophesying, speaking by divine inspiration is what I'm doing right now. I'm speaking to you by divine inspiration. What's my divine inspiration? It's the Bible. And it's the same goes for you. When you talk to somebody about Jesus, you're speaking by divine inspiration. When you tell somebody about the gospel and about the crucifixion, death, and burial and resurrection of Jesus, you're speaking by divine inspiration. So that's prophesying. That's what he's talking about. So that everybody benefits. That's the whole purpose of prophesying, so that everyone can benefit. So all the hearers, everyone who hears you will benefit from it.
When John the Baptist's father started prophesying, he was reciting things.
He was reciting scripture. Mary did the same thing when the angel came to her and said, you're going to have a baby. And she started quoting the Song of Hannah. So she prophesied. So we call it prophesying, but the charismatic and Pentecostal movements have changed that meaning to mean foretell the future. Yeah, and that's not what it means.
No,
All right, is that clear?
It's not.
All right, so now let's get to women being silent in the churches. All right, so back then it was a different time. All right, it's a whole different ballgame. If women were to keep completely silent in the church, then the scripture is not true that says that they should sing psalms, they should prophesy, and they should teach young girls and all that other stuff. They wouldn't be able to open their mouths and speak, right? They wouldn't be able to do any of that if women are to keep completely silent in the church. Now, that's not what that means. When he says, I would that women not speak, it's talking about being a speaker, being a pastor, being an elder. Women cannot be elders. Women cannot be pastors. And there's a reason for that. It's God's order. God's order, he's assigned roles and responsibilities to different people.
Just like that one woman was teaching the pastor.
Right.
But
Well, her and her husband.
Right.
And everyone seems to forget that. If her and her husband were both teaching Apollos. So we have to remember that God's order does not necessarily mean that you're less important. All right? If God puts you in a role, it doesn't mean that you are less important. If God puts me in the role of a pastor, it doesn't make you less important. It makes you just as important, because I get to teach you by divine inspiration. I get to instruct you and hopefully help you grow and mature in Christ. And you get to help others do the same thing.
It's like the role of a mother, you can't put anything negative on that. I mean, how important that is. I mean, the role of the mother is raising kings, raise decent people, or however. I mean,
So back in the first century, in the churches, when they, the sections were separated. You had men and women, men on one side, women on the other side, and there are still churches who do that today. And during the services, and this is historical fact, you would have women talking over to the side while the teaching is going on. And it was disruptive, right? They were asking questions to each other. And I used the example of when Marilyn and Maria were sitting here during Dave's teaching, and they just kept talking to each other. And wasn't it disruptive?
Yes, it was.
It was very disruptive. You couldn't understand the teaching, and sometimes he would wait very patiently, bless his heart, and he would sit here and just wait for them to get through, and everyone else would have to wait until they got through, until they realized, oh, you shouldn't be talking. But that happened a lot. It's the same thing that happened in the first century. The women would start talking and asking each other, what does that mean? What does that mean? That's why he says, let the women ask their husbands at home. If you don't know something that's being taught, then ask your husband when you get home, right?
Oh, okay.
But we're supposed to pay attention, and we're supposed to help each other learn and listen. So he doesn't mean that women can't speak, because women certainly spoke and they prophesied in the early church. So it doesn't mean any of that. And when he says they can't speak, he's talking about not speaking from the pulpit. Women can't do that.
or interrupting.
Yeah, 2 Timothy 2:12, that, because Adam was formed first, the woman was formed second, the woman was deceived, Adam was not, Adam chose to sin. So now the responsibility of leading God's church is on the man. And it's a responsibility, it's a burden. It's not like a job description, it's not a promotion. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Being a mother, that's a burden.
I'm just thinking about the women and, how that caught my attention. Maybe they put Esther in there, folklore, so that women wouldn't be mad, because the whole Bible is nothing but men. So they threw Esther in to make the women happy.
But that was chosen a lot. There was other books that was in there that was written that weren't allowed in the Bible for whatever reason.
Right.
And that might have been because of, again, there's some high-minded men that put the Bible together and they chose to leave things out.
no, that's not true.
Well,
The Bible says that men were inspired by God, and because they were inspired by God, they chose what goes in the Bible. So it actually says that. Don't ask me where, because I can't remember.
Well, I was,
Sean, does that answer your question?
we would understand the JFT years later, because if it hadn't been put in here, what would we have to refer to? I mean,
Right.
How would we learn?
But
Right.
just like you just mentioned that there was other books, some of those books were left out for different reasons. Sometimes it was because of the language, sometimes it was because they didn't think it agreed. Overall, the book is all inspired by God. But there's some other things that we keep finding that God allows us to find too later,
Well, and that's why I say, just because a book is not in the Bible does not make it less important.
Right.
It's the same way with, like I said earlier, with all of you. I may be a pastor, but that doesn't make you less important.
All the history of the books is one that.
And the books that were chosen for canonization those books were chosen because they specifically would tell eyewitness accounts and stories of Jesus and point to Christ directly. Other books like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th Maccabees, which is in the Catholic Bible, those books were left out. Why? Because 1st Maccabees is historical. It's just an historical account. 2nd Maccabees is an over-spiritualized account of 1st Maccabees. 3rd and 4th Maccabees, I don't know what that is. And there's lots of books like that. The book of Jasher, for instance. You see a reference to Jasher in the Old Testament, in our Old Testament. But the book of Jasher that's out today is a forgery. And historians have proved that. They proved that it's a forgery. So,
The big one, but it's the one they got,
Right.
isn't it?
I saw a debate between a historian, a biblical historian, and another guy who was trying to claim that there's a Sinai Bible, which is basically the Codex Sinaiticus, which is one of the oldest Bibles, and he says it doesn't say that Jesus was crucified. The historian says, well, actually, yes, it does, and I've got it right here. And he made the guy look like a fool. And he says, well, the Book of Bartholomew is a 14th century creation. So a lot of these books were created in the Middle Ages because the Catholic Church wanted legends, they wanted myths, they wanted stories that they could tell. So a lot of these were invented in the Middle Ages. Some of them were not, like the Book of Enoch. The first Book of Enoch was actually used by the dwellers of Qumran and were found in the cave along with the Book of Isaiah. So that was actually used. So people would read that, but it was written in Greek and it wasn't written in Hebrew. And that's why
It didn't make it in here.
That's why it didn't make it in the Bible, yeah. But it's an interesting read, but I don't hold a lot of stock in it because it has like 3 different sections that go in 3 different directions. It talks about the falling of the angels, and it even names them, and it talks about Enoch traveling to see the portals of heaven and the portals of hell and all that, and then it talks about other stuff. And it's an interesting read. And
Well, I don't understand that there was like 3 books. First one sounded fairly accurate, the second one was getting strange, and the third one hard to hold.
and that's usually what happens.
But
The Gnosticism starts to creep in.
it's kind of like history. We can look at history, and some of the history is very accurate, and sometimes it's misled because it's just the writer.
And those writers have started to try to manipulate, and you get different writers. For instance, a lot of charismatics and Pentecostals believe in the rapture. So they try to say, well, it was in a sermon by a man named Ephraim the Syrian in the 4th century. Did Ephraim the Syrian exist? Yes, he did. Did he give a sermon? Well, I'm sure he gave lots of sermons. The sermon that they're referring to was actually written 200 years later by somebody else using his name. You see what I mean? And that happened a lot.
Oh, kind of like even what was the slave war that we had. You look at one side of it. After the war, they claimed that it wasn't about slavery at all. The North or the South. The South claimed it wasn't slavery at all. Yet they did everything still to try to keep it there.
And this brings it to the point of, this is why we have to be discerning, because even in American history, American history has been doctored so much, and so much important information has been left out, and so that you would think a certain way when you read it. It's the same way with even the stories of war, like the Vietnam War. A lot of the real reasons and the important issues of why we were there was left out, so that you think, oh, we're going to fight communism. Well, it wasn't a threat to us during Vietnam. The Iraq War, the same thing. Saddam Hussein wasn't a threat to us. The whole thing, that everything we see today is basically built on lies. And
Partial truths.
Yeah, partial truths. This whole thing with Iran, partial truths. What they're doing is, what the government is doing is they're using that It's that whole weapons of mass destruction that were never there, right?
Okay.
Yeah, they're using the same excuse for Iran. Well, Iran, they can get nuclear weapons. Sure, anybody can. I think North Korea just proved that. They have 57 nuclear missiles, right? Where'd they get them from?
Our lot.
From who?
Anybody that has money.
From China.
Yeah, China,
Yeah.
they-
So can Iran get nuclear weapons? Absolutely.
They got the money and oil.
If they had the money and oil, but Trump pretty much destroyed their whole infrastructure.
Especially if.
But here's the thing that bothers me, and I don't want to get political, but here's the thing that bothers me about this whole thing with Iran and Trump is that we were first asked by Israel to assist them in invading Iran and stopping Iran. So Trump said yes. All of a sudden, it's now become our war. Israel has backed off and said, let the Americans do this, right? So now America is now involved in this, and Trump says, well, I'm going to demolish them. I'm going to totally destroy the IRGC, right? Did he do it? No, because they're still around, and he's negotiating with them for peace. Why are they still around? Number one, finish the job. If you're saying you're going to go finish the job, then go finish the job. Don't just say it and then stop doing it, stop bombing, and stop, doing whatever you're going to do, and then start negotiating with them so they can come back and
He's trying to placate.
being stronger. Yeah, so he's trying to do all this stuff, and all it's doing is just creating, a larger mess.
It was supposed to be 50 years. They had a dictatorship take over, like the SS in Germany.
Yeah.
And they've been taking over, and so they kept eliminating them to get the real someone else back.
Can you check to see if this thing started? I didn't think I noticed.
And one more thing. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were, that was supposed to be a community.
Mhm.
Did you ever read that and say,
Check to see if the copy's started.
did somebody wrote that through hypnosis of people that were some type of accounts?
No.
Dead Sea, okay. Because I was in jail and I was reading it, and I pictured you saying that you might have read that, but it was through hypnosis. But where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found was actually a complete, it was like a pilgrimage thing there, and where they had documentation and they had.
The Dead Sea Scrolls were basically a collection of old scripture scrolls, including the book of Isaiah, that's
Yeah.
the Bible, and other books like Enoch, and other books like the Golden Scroll, which then has the War Scroll that start. Okay. And all these other things that are in there that we still haven't even touched yet.
Yeah.
But they're all there.
I mean, its origination was like a community. There was a community.
Yeah, it
A
was
scholarship type community.
so it was the Essene community.
As I think.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Essenes were there.
Yeah.
The Essenes were former Israelite priests
Okay.
who didn't like where the priesthood was headed. And where the priesthood was heading was the Pharisees,
Mhm.
the Sadducees, all the people that put Jesus on trial. So the Essenes wanted to separate themselves and devote themselves to God. So they moved to Qumran, and they had all the scrolls there, and they buried them there, and they eventually were wiped out, I think, by the Romans or somebody. And it was discovered by a shepherd, by a Bedouin shepherd, and he discovered all the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they went in and got them all. And so, and they're very important because they confirm historically everything that we have in our Bible today.
Because they kept claiming that, the Bible had been passed down by word of mouth so many times that it can't be very accurate. And then they found those scrolls and they're almost word for word the same.
And here's the counter argument for that. When people say, it's been diluted so much because it's been interpreted so many different ways, the truth is, and I get this a lot with King James only people.
Yeah.
King James is the only true inspired Bible. No, it's not. King James took their information from the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus. And the reason why it's called the Codex Vaticanus, and both of those are from the 3rd century, the reason why it's called the Codex Vaticanus is because in the Middle Ages, it was moved to the Vatican and placed in the Vatican Library, so they called it the Codex Vaticanus. Okay, got it. But they took most of the information from that. And a lot of the Bible, if you look at the history of how it evolved, so you had the Torah, the original Torah that were written by Moses. You had those scrolls, the book of the law. And then sometime during Babylon, the book of the law was hidden somewhere. And it went away. So while they're in Babylon, they have the oral memory of the book of the law.
Right.
So you had many of the Israelites were dictating it to, this is why we have the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek version of the book of the law, and which Paul quotes the Septuagint, and so does Jesus. So, and then you have the Syrian Bible, which is the same. And so when they came back from captivity in Babylon, this is what we read in Ezra. Ezra found the book of the law, right? So they build a platform for him, and he stands on the platform and he starts to read the whole thing. Well, the people didn't understand it. So he had to appoint leaders, and this is my argument for people who say that they don't believe in church leadership. And I know one in particular. But leaders were appointed to explain to them, to the people, what was being talked about from the platform. That make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So they just had different leaders everywhere. And then that book eventually went away again and was lost. And so all that was left was the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Bible, which came through up until the time of Christ. The Hebrew Bible that we have today wasn't written and put together until the 2nd century AD. Then that's by the Masoretes, the Masoretic text. And so what they did was they gathered all the information that they could find from the Septuagint and from the old writings and from everywhere else. And they said, let's put together the Hebrew Bibles. That's what we have. That's sitting up there. So then that's when then you had all the writings from Paul and from the apostles and everybody else, and those started getting gathered together in the 2nd century. They started pulling those together. And so the first collection, the first complete Bible, was the Codex Sinaiticus.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, how far back was that?
They come from the 1st century, or actually before the 1st century, probably the 1st century BC.
So, like I said, a whole lot of what we found was word of mouth, and not was very accurate compared to the Dead Sea
Yes.
Scrolls.
Yes, yeah. And so the counter argument for what you were saying earlier, that I never got to, and I'll end with this, is the counter argument is back then they had 31, during the time of the King James Bible was being written, they only had 31 scrolls to go off of. Today, we have over 5,000 that they've rediscovered and verified historically, linguistically, and everywhere else. So now we have over 5,000. So now that just brings us to the accuracy of the Bible. So when we have different versions of the Bible now, like the ESV or the New King James or the New American Standard, we're getting a more accurate translation. Does that make sense? All right.
In the New American Standard reads that there were 2 people in a graveyard when Jesus passed through there instead of 1. That would they sent the swine that he was prepared to send it to the swine. That was in the that book, that big Bible that I had. It had 2. I don't know. There's another version and another like Matthew, Mark, or something. But no, I threw me out. Instead of 1 person breaking the chains and harassing people.
Yeah.
They had 2 people.
Do you have another question?
Other than, I'm done.
Okay. All right. That's it for this.
Did you get shot up?
Yeah, and she said I answered her question.
Oh, okay. She probably got one.
Thank you.
She had the same question you did.
Yeah.
That's what we ask those questions, because sometimes somebody else says the same thing, and they just didn't raise their hand.
Yeah.
Morning.
Good morning. How's things going?